This is RC Jim, and this is just a follow-on from our video on the very basics of radio-controlled flying and how to do it. Now, what I want to do in this video is just simply talk about some of the issues and challenges that you have when flying your radio-controlled plane. Now, we'd like to think that you just simply know, yeah, it's going to fly, you pull back and it goes up and off you go, and you know, Bob's your uncle. But there are issues and problems that take place, and it's really unfortunate when somebody is starting out and they have a really nice plane and they do something dumb and crash it. You know, kind of hurts the pride and hurts the pocketbook a bit as well. So I want to talk about some of the issues and challenges that you face in your training in the very early days. Now, the first one would have to do with orientation, and we discussed this very briefly in our first video. As the plane is flying along, when it's going away from you, then everything is really nice and sweet, and the right is the right, left is left, and hopefully you've got it right side up. Down is down, up is up, and so forth. That's all great. Okay, so you turn and you're coming around, and now the plane is coming towards you. And as it's coming towards you, all of a sudden things are getting a little bit confusing. And you think, okay, I want to turn to the right. Okay, to the right, that's that way. And so you push your stick to the right and the plane goes that way. And you think, oh no, that's not what I wanted to do. Okay, you have to think like you're the pilot in there. And so if you want the plane to go this way, which way is that for the pilot? That's his left arm over on this side. This is the port side of the aircraft, you know, if you're thinking about comparing it to a boat. So he needs to turn left if he's going that way, so that means you're pushing your stick that way. And when you push your stick that way, that makes the plane go to the left, which is going to your right, but the way that you want to go. Now let's say it's coming towards you and the plane is going like this and you want to level it off, and this would be especially true if you're getting ready to land the plane and you're wondering which way is what's happening. Well, you want to lift this wing over here on this side. Okay, that needs to get lifted. Okay, for the pilot, that means, you think about him, he needs to turn that way, which for the pilot is his right. And so you're going to push your stick to the right. But for you, pushing your stick to the right is pushing it that way. And as you do that, it brings the plane back. Now, we mentioned this earlier in the first video, but a very nice little thing to help you, especially during landings, you panic a little bit and you're confused. If you want to lift the lower wing, push the aileron stick towards that lower wing. And as you do that, it's going to lift it. Okay? If the other one gets down a bit, push the stick that way, it's going to lift it. Use real small movements on your stick. You don't need to do a lot. Do little tiny movements. Move it very gradually, and you'll have those things happening in a way that you want it to happen. Okay. Now, another thing that will happen is just confusion. Something happens, the wind bounces the plane in a particular way, and you just, what do I do? What do I do? Which way do I go? Okay? Now, one of the things is if you're going real fast and something like that's happened, a good automatic thing to start with is pulling the throttle back. Slow down a bit so things aren't happening so fast. Naturally, you want to level the wings if you can in a situation like that. So if it's going away from you, you know, just normal right and left. If it's coming towards you, what we just described. So you level the wings, and then as you level the wings, then bring the plane's nose to horizontal with the ground, and recover in that particular way. But sometimes the plane is so far away, and maybe the sun is behind it, you got some bright clouds behind it, something like that, and it's just hard to see, is it going or is it coming? What's happening, you know? So the thing to do there is the plane is flying along, you're not sure whether it's coming towards you or going away, move the control stick, and let's say you move the control stick to the right, that if it's going away from you, then the plane is going to go off to the right. If it's coming towards you and you move your stick to the right, then it's going to do the opposite thing. And so if the stick is acting where it's lifting the lower wing, then it's saying the plane is coming towards you. If the stick is working the way it normally would, as far as the plane going same direction that the stick is going, then it's going away from you. So with that little very small movements on the control, you can see what's happening. Of course, if you are increasing the bank, you can back off a bit to be a little bit less. If it's going away, you can allow it to continue going around the turn until it's coming back towards you again. And you know, again, if it's far away, you know, generally you want to avoid that to begin with. But if it is far away and that just has happened, and you get it flying back towards you, then just do some straight and level flight with it gradually coming towards you, keeping the wings level by lifting the lower wing, moving the stick in that particular direction, and you can get it back to where you can see it well and know what's going on. So orientation and confusion can be two issues when you're learning how to fly. Now let's think about some of the very basic things in the flying itself. Now, what about takeoff issues? Ideally, what you'd like to have happen is have a nice long run up to get up to a decent airspeed, and then take off in a nice smooth angle, very scale-like. That's what you'd like to do. Unfortunately, these things have the capability, well, fortunately or unfortunately, whatever, they got the capability to take off in next to nothing and virtually go straight up. And that can be exciting to do that when you do it right, but it also can lead to some significant problems, because if you do that too soon, even though you got all that power on, you might end up stalling a wing, and the thing falling over and doing a cartwheel and doing all kinds of horrible stuff. So don't take off too soon. Don't lift off too soon. Essentially, as you get going, what you're going to do is you're going to have a little bit of, well, you're going to start out as you're taxiing with the elevator all the way back pretty much, just to make sure you don't nose over. You'll keep it there as you begin to get started going down the runway, but very soon you're going to let that off. And instead of just not touching it, you're actually going to be looking at the airplane as if you're flying, but it's still on the ground. But you're looking at the orientation of the fuselage, that it's nice and even and level with the ground, to where it's basically flying along the line of the ground. And it might be a little bit up, a little bit of down, but you're flying it just straight along on the ground with the wheel still on the ground. Okay? As you're doing that, you're gradually increasing the throttle to a point where you feel it's going fast enough, and then you just give it a little bit of up elevator, just pulling back on the stick just a tiny bit to get it off the ground and up and going. And then once you get established on that path of climbing out, basically all of the controls, if the plane is trimmed well, the controls are going to be neutral. You know, other than the throttle is going to be up where you want it. And by the way, a lot of these planes, they don't need full throttle to take off. You might end up being well up here before you actually get the full throttle, depending on the airplane, of course. But you want to have plenty of airspeed before you begin that rotation, and then you take off at a nice steady angle, and all of the time keeping it straight going down the line of the runway, using the rudder early on, and as you lift off, then using the ailerons. Okay, so don't lift off too soon. Now, the second issue that you might have, and this particular plane right here is absolutely notorious for doing it, is it likes to pull to the left. Now, a lot of warbirds like this, you got a pretty long nose, the prop's way out there, and you get this torque effect happening with that propeller turning, and it just wants to pull the airplane to the left. And this guy really takes a lot of correction to keep the thing going straight. But as I was working on the technique for handling that, and of course basically the rudder is what you're using to do that, along with following this practice here, gradually increasing the throttle. But as I was working on that with this notorious sort of airplane that was really a challenge to fly, I was noticing others that typically they angled off to the left as they were taking off, and it was relatively smooth, and they weren't planes that had the characteristic that this one has as far as being so dramatic and so severe about it. But it actually is a common problem that even experienced pilots tend to do, is they don't exercise that discipline to keep climbing out straight. And the whole thing from the run up and the going along the ground and taking off, it's going off to the left. Now when you got a left-hand pattern, that isn't too dangerous, but might be a bit of an issue if you're going the opposite direction and the thing wants to go over the car park or something like that. Essentially what you're doing is you're using your rudder as you go along. Use the rudder to keep it straight, and just however much movement it takes to keep it straight, and you'll learn that as you go. But part of being able to get the right amount in there is to increase the throttle slowly. And as you're slowly increasing the throttle, that gives you time to sort of work out how much rudder to push in there to keep that thing going straight. And just keep going up with it, keep working on that rudder, keeping it straight, until the thing is ready to lift off. Okay, another takeoff issue is over-controlling. And it's so easy to just simply, think, oh no, I'm going the wrong way, and I push the stick real quick, and the plane does a flip and goes crazy and all of that. So, two things that you want to do with that. First off, use low rates. So, a transmitter is going to have all these extra switches around the top. And I'm using this particular one here for low, medium, and high rates. And what that means is when it's on a low rate, it takes a lot of movement of the stick to get a small movement on the control surface. When I'm up at the other end at the high rate, even a very small movement on the stick gives a very large movement on the control surface. Okay? So low, medium, high. So with that, use that low one when you're taking off. Okay? Because you're going to be making small adjustments and things like that. You don't need to be, doing anything aerobatic taking off. You want it nice and steady and smooth, and where you're not going to overcorrect. The other thing that you can do, and I'm sure that your instructor will be helping you do this on your transmitter, is you set up what we call expo. Expo is for exponential. And so what that means is that with very small movements of the stick, you get those very low rates that we just discussed. But as you get the stick out towards the extreme, then you get the high rates. So it's basically very fine controls near the middle. As you're moving it back and forth, just very fine control there. But if you really need to get out of some emergency or whatever, you can push it all the way and you get the full movement of the control by the time you get out to the end. So we've got another video on that. If you want to get into that as to how you set that up, see our video on the Spectrum NX transmitters. Okay, another problem, and again, yeah, she's guilty again. Nosing over. Now that can happen at any old time, but it's interesting with this particular plane. If you set it up the way the factory suggests, your balance point is right in the middle of the wheel well, okay? So if you set it up the way they want you to set it up, that's where your balance point is. But look where the wheels are. The wheels are not very far forward of where they want you to balance the plane. Now me, I've got mine balanced a little bit farther back, and I've got another whole video on weight and balance and how that's done and why I think they're wrong as to how the manufacturer said to set up this one. But even with a weight farther back in the plane, this one still was notorious for wanting to nose over. So of course you have to keep that elevator all the way back, all the way up the elevator when you're moving around on the ground. And when you go to take off, start out with it all the way back, and as it starts to roll and picks up a little bit of speed, You don't want to wait too late, otherwise the thing will try to take off and you'll end up stalling and doing a cartwheel or whatever. But as it begins to pick up speed and all of that, you're releasing the elevator. You do that bit as far as flying along the ground until you got the speed to take off, and then you up in the air you go. Tail draggers, and especially military planes such as this one, are notorious for that. With a tricycle gear plane, you don't have as much of a problem with that, but some of the nose wheels on a tricycle gear plane have got a wire that winds around, and I should pull one out to show you. A lot of planes with a fixed gear are going to have a nose wheel like this, okay? And so you've got the wire coming down, and then it goes through a bunch of coils, and then it comes down here again. So this wire here is offset from that one. Well, these things, depending on the weight of the plane, now this is a pretty rugged one here, so it's hard to imagine this thing doing much. But I've seen ones on planes where this basically folds over as the thing noses into the ground and then flips over a little bit sideways. Okay, and I think it's because it's perhaps a lower gauge wire than maybe what it ought to be for that particular plane. But with that offset between where it's supported there and where the force is applied here, it's easy for that thing to go over. And as this thing starts bending this way, it's also going to tend to turn the plane that way, which is going to make it want to again fall over the other way and nose in. So with regard to that, how do you avoid a problem with that? Well, it's very much like what you do with a tail dragger. And that is, you don't want weight on that nose. You know, the tail dragger, there's no nose wheel to hold it up, so you can't be putting weight on it. But with the tricycle gear, just be flying it along the ground such that nose wheel doesn't have to do much of anything. Okay, as you're picking up speed, the rudder is going to give you most of the directional control, and that nose wheel is doing a tiny little bit. But don't have it with the thing really firmly planted in the ground, because it can bend over and do all kinds of things. No, be flying that plane level along the ground as if you're in the air, but you're just watching it as it goes along the ground. You're just keeping it straight and level with the elevator. Okay, keeping it straight and level until you get up to that airspeed that you want, then slowly pull back on the elevator stick, and up you go. Okay, so those are the takeoff issues. Now, that brings us to landing issues. And we've mentioned before, you know, that as you think about the various things that you want to do with a plane, well, it's kind of like what the astronaut said when, I'm not sure who it was, Neil Armstrong or somebody, was asked, what's the most important thing that you do once you get to the moon? And they said, be able to get back home, or something to that effect. Yeah, kind of important to get back down on the ground and get there in one piece. And well, with the radio-controlled airplanes, you want to do the same thing. So the landing issues are going to be very important. Now with landing, as you think about looking down at the field from above, you've got your box down here where the people are standing that are controlling the planes. You've got your flying field out here in front of you, and there'll be a certain area in the flying field that you're using for your runway, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in the middle. Certainly a safe distance away from the edge, but having it closer is going to make it easier to land than if you're, you know, miles away, something like that. So anyway, depending on which way the wind is blowing, say if the wind is blowing from this direction over here, then we're going to be taking off into the wind, going this way. We're going to climb up, and then we're going to go into what we call a pattern. And the pattern is going to go around something like this. Okay? So this is the basic pattern that you're flying, and it's typically used, well, with radio-controlled aircraft. If you got multiple people up there, you're going to be flying that most of the time with just little bits and pieces that you do here and there along the way. But certainly before taking and landing, that's what you want to be flying. So in terms of learning how to land, the first thing to learn is how to fly the pattern. So your instructor gets you up in the air and gets it out here. Keep in mind that these distances out off from the field are always such that if you lose your engine and the engine quits, that you've got an adequate height and the small enough distance to bring it around and bring it down and do a safe landing. Okay, so you don't want to be way off out in Timbuktu someplace. And also, as we talked about the orientation issues, you know, that's important as well, to keep it where you can see it. So the first thing you want to do is to be able to learn to fly a very precise pattern. So the instructor gets it up in the air and you do these turns. You might have 2 square turns, or you might have 1 big U-turn on each end. Personally, I wouldn't be terribly fussed about that. But you want to be able to get it out there and get it coming in right straight over the runway. Fly straight down the runway and then turn it back, come along parallel, not too far away, and be able to repeat that over and over again very precisely. Okay, so that's the first thing that you do. The second thing that you'll do is, as you're coming around here, typically you need to be at a rather low point here so that it doesn't go running off the end of the field down at the end. A lot of these planes will really tend to go a long ways, and especially if there's not a lot of wind, which is ideal flying conditions, but in terms of landing, the wind is helping to slow you down. And so without the wind, you're probably going to have to be reasonably low coming in here, a safe height, but reasonably low. And so the next thing that you do with regard to landing is you're flying the pattern and you begin to descend about here, and you're gradually coming down to get down to your desired point down here. So this is where you're going to say, yeah, I'm lined up with the runway and I'm at an elevation where if I glide in, that I'm going to be able to touch down and land. With most of your trainer aircraft, you'll do a power off landing and you won't use flaps. So you'll be coming down here, and someplace in here you'll be cutting the throttle, and you'll have to experiment with just exactly where that is. A lot depends on how far this is out. It's kind of nice if you can do it after you've made the final turn, just to avoid a stall during that. But either way, out here someplace you're going to be cutting the throttle in here. Okay, so you cut the throttle and you get a feeling for how slow you can fly it coming in there without the thing stalling. And if you see the plane sort of, you know, fall a little bit or get sluggish or whatever, give it some more throttle to where you're safe, and just practice coming in to where you're 10 meters off the ground or something like that. You know, again, a safe sort of height through here, and maybe 5 meters off the ground. Just fly it along and then give it some throttle, get back up to altitude over there, and keep doing that for a while, where you're getting the feeling of what it's like gliding in without the throttle, but not coming all the way down to the ground. You keep on doing that and getting closer and closer to the ground until finally you think, okay, now I can land the thing and set it down, and you do that. Commonly with a lot of people, they end up touching down way down at the end of the field. It's kind of hard to say what the best thing is to do, because like in our situation, we got trees here and we got trees there. So you don't want to put it in the trees, and you're concerned as to, you know, if it might lose some altitude if you get a partial stall or something in here someplace, you know. So you'd kind of like to be well above the trees, you know, as you're coming in. But it's really easy if you end up touching way down, way down here, to not be able to stop by the time you get to the end of the field. So ideally, something around the middle would be a good place. You know, with a real aircraft, it might be, you know, more towards this end here for safety's sake, but they tend to have a very clear approach coming in. So probably aim for something around the middle. Okay, so with the takeoff issues, not enough airspeed, torque effect pulling left, over controlling again can be a problem, bearing the nose. Landing issues, we need to learn to fly the pattern without landing. Figure out when we need to cut the throttle to get to a point where we'll be able to touch down around in the middle. and do all those missed approaches as we get ready. Now, thinking about the landing pattern that we have here, another difficulty that a lot of people have with this is lining up with that intended runway. Now this might all be a grass field, and you might not even have a concrete runway to line up to, but you still have a desired distance out that you want to be and straight along the line of the field. And sometimes when you're over here where everybody's sitting and looking at the plane as it's coming around here, it's really hard to know when to turn in to be in line with that. Well, you can play around with it, and this is especially true if you got a crosswind, you know, that's blowing one way or the other way, and the plane, when it's going straight, actually, you know, gets blown by the wind off one side or the other. But one thing that you can do that's quite good is actually turn in a bit early. And as you turn in early, you're over here, have the plane go straight towards you. Okay? So you're over here in the box, and you're having the plane come straight towards you. And then by the time you're getting down to here, it's coming down the whole time, like you're landing. But when you come down to where you're getting close to that line that you want to be on, then you turn to go straight and you finalize your landing. Now that's very helpful in two ways. One is that wherever you pick out here, as you aim it towards yourself, eventually it's going to come across that line. So it's helpful that way. And the second thing is that when you got that point where you do need to decide that you're on the line, the plane is much closer to you, and you can actually see where you're at. And I guess we'll add a third one, and that is if you do have a crosswind where it's very difficult to know what angle to crab at to keep on that line as you're coming in for a landing, you don't have to worry about crabbing at all if you're doing this. As it comes in along this line towards you, even with the wind blowing, when you get to this point, it's closer to where you can see it, and you can then turn, and then if you do have a crosswind, you can drop one wing, or you can crab and then straighten it out just as you're touching down, but a variety of things that you can do, and it's a lot less work than if you're having to do it from way out here. Okay, next issue that you could have with landing is a bounce. Now, we're picking on tail draggers today, so let's get our little old trail dragger out here. Think about where the various wheels and the gear are on this plane, and think about where the center of gravity is. Okay, so the main wheels are in front of the center of gravity. So if you hit this hard enough and it hits on one of these wheels that's in front of the center of gravity, what's it going to do to the plane? It's going to bump the nose up. Okay? If you're going too fast and you bump the nose up, what happens to the plane? Well, it goes up. Okay, but you got the power off, most likely at a time like that. You're coming in, you're intending, you're coming in at an angle, and you're coming in too fast, but you hit the ground, bounces the nose up, it balloons up in the air, and oftentimes that's enough to make it stall. And so immediately, bang, goes nose down and probably flops over on its back. Okay, tricycle gear. Airplanes are more forgiving with regard to that, but you can still nose those into the ground as well. So the first thing to avoid on a landing is coming in too fast. If you're coming in too fast, it hits the ground, it'll tend to balloon up. You can have a problem then with it stalling, whatever might happen. So don't come in too fast. Now, I might say that it is possible to land an airplane going much faster than its stall speed, but to do that, you have to do the sort of thing that I was talking about with taking off, where you're flying it along the ground. You're coming in and you do the flare out, but then you just imagine that the ground wasn't there, and you're flying at level along there until it actually touches the wheels on the ground. And then you keep on flying the thing level as it slows down. Well, if you're landing, as it slows down. And then once the tail's dropped, then you give it the full back elevator, the full up, to hold it down. But that's a technique that's more difficult to do. So as you're learning, you'll be doing a stall type landing where you're coming in, you're coming in a glide angle with a adequate airspeed to keep it in the air and with a bit of safety measure there. When you get close to the ground, you flare out just a little bit as it slows down, and as you do it in the right way, it's just going to keep on slowing down, and you just keep on holding that thing off of the runway until it can't hold off anymore and it just sets down, okay? And that will be very close to its stall speed when that happens. And so when it does that and it's already slowed down to its stall speed, there's no way that it's going to bounce and go back up into the air again. So don't come in too fast when you're learning. Okay, another problem that can happen, and need we say, again, very prevalent with a tail dragger, is what we call a ground loop. Now, again, it has to do with the placement of the landing gear. Now, as you think about the placement of the landing gear, again, they're in front of where the center of gravity is. The center of gravity is back here, the landing gear are up there. Imagine when it's coming in and it gives a little bit of a turn one way. Okay, as it gives a turn that way, it's applying a force off to the side. And that force off to the side is wanting to turn the plane in the same direction that it started to go. And so that turning force off to the side, it's going this way, and that wheel turned like that is making it want to go over there. That is going to make the plane want to turn more. These wheels being in front of the center of gravity means, again, there's applying even more turning force, which is also twisting it further that way, and the thing spins right around. Now, that is a rather scary thing to happen if you're in the plane, and I did have that happen to me once in the Citabra decathlon when I was learning how to fly. I was with the instructor, and we were flying in the winter in Michigan. And they had cleared the snow off the runway, but it was kind of angled, it was curved, a couple S-turns along the way. And with a Citabra, when you flare out to land, you can't see in front of you. The nose covers it up, so you're looking out the side, and we're on a grass runway. It's just simply been plowed with a snowblower. And so all you could see out there was plain snow, and you had no idea as to whether you were still lined up with the thing or not. And I stuck one of those gear into the snowbank, and boom, off to the side I went, and I stomped on the rudder and gave it opposite aileron, and fortunately we ended up right side up off to the side of where we were supposed to be, sitting in some rather deep snow. So you won't have that problem with your radio-controlled aircraft. But a ground loop is something that's very prevalent with a tail dragger. Most likely, as you're learning, you're going to have a tricycle gear, so it's not likely that you're going to have much of a problem with that. Okay, we mentioned burying the nose, taking off. I've seen that happen. Same sort of thing can happen when you're landing. When you're landing, that nose wheel on a tricycle aircraft should not be doing much of anything until the thing is next to stopped. You're landing on the main gear, bringing those down first. Those are coming in contact with the runway, and you hold a bit of elevator in there to keep that nose up until it drops. And by the time it's dropped, there's no way that it wants to bury the nose in the ground. So do a proper landing, and that will be fine. Okay, control and discipline. This is an issue as you're learning. It's tempting to immediately, once you get that plane in the air and you get a feel for what it can do, just to go crazy and doing loops and rolls and all kinds of things and stuff like that. But there'll come a time for that. But at the beginning, exercise discipline. Just work on precision in everything that you do. Work on a precise scale like takeoff, precise turns, staying in the pattern, doing everything exactly as it's planned. And as you do that, you'll find that you get a much better handle on controlling the aircraft. If you allow yourself to just go up there and go squirreling around all over the place, who knows whether you've really done what you planned on doing or not. It's just gone up there and you've managed to recover from whatever it is that's happened, you know. But get that discipline and learn the basics first and get that going well before you do anything else. So you're going to start out with straight and level flight. You'll then work into the full pattern. Along the way, in our airfield, we've got prevailing winds that mean that 80% of the time the wind is coming from the right, and so we fly a left-hand pattern going around. But every once in a while the wind comes from the other way, and it's amazing how much it throws you off when you're just doing right turns instead of left turns, you know. So even if you're not using the right hand or the opposite pattern, whichever you're going, right or left, practice it both ways and practice the approach both ways and things like that to get very comfortable with that. As you get comfortable with basically doing all of that, then you can start doing some figure eights, and figure eights as viewed from above. And the figure eight from above is going to give you a good feeling for, you know, which way the plane is going, and having, again, precision in terms of the amount of bank to have and doing that. So do the figure eights one way, then come up the next time and do the figure eights in the opposite way. And that, again, will be helping you. We've already mentioned about the full pattern with the landing approaches. After you've done all that, you'll do a takeoff on your own, flying into the pattern, and then once you're comfortable with actually landing the plane, you'll do a landing. Okay, I might say that it's a good idea as you're flying your plane, and especially as you're learning, to keep yourself about 3 mistakes high. I made the mistake last week of, you know, I was flying inverted with a Ranger. You know, they're not made to do that, and I'm not as good as what I ought to be. But anyway, I'm flying inverted with the Ranger, and I did one pass, you know, flying inverted, and everything was fine, and so I thought, cool, I've got this licked, you know. And I'd lost a little bit of altitude, and I'm coming back the other way, and so I flick it over, and I've got the forward elevator in there to hold it in place, and I just turned it the wrong way on the aileron, and it started to come down. And so anyway, in the process of trying to recover, I end up nosediving into the ground. Well, yeah, it can happen to a lot of people, and you know, anyway, that happened. Okay. Okay, now, another issue that you'll have in the early days is what to do with a stall. Okay, and as we mentioned, a stall is not that the engine dies, but it's there's not enough wind flowing across the wing to produce the lift that it needs, or it's not flowing in the right way across too high of an angle of attack, and you lose your lift and the plane starts coming down. Okay, now, the first thing that you ought to be doing is, at some stage here, around this part of your training, so you ought to be coming in high over the runway, and slow it down, and slow it down, and slow it down. Keep the nose up, keep the nose up, keep the nose up, until the thing drops, okay? As the thing begins to drop, then you add in a bit of throttle, and as it picks up speed, then you regain your altitude and off you go, okay? If you're going straight, most likely it's going to fall straight. Big danger with stalls is when you stall going around a curve and turning the airplane, and one wing is not going fast enough, it stalls, and the plane can drop and then spin. So you certainly want to avoid that. But in practicing it, practice it with straight level flight and get a feel for how fast the plane is going when it begins to stall. And then also observe what the plane is doing when it stalls. Did you feel something sluggish ahead of time? Did it begin to shake a little bit? What can you see about the plane, and what can you observe that tells you that this thing is going into a stall. And that's going to be really important along the way as you're coming in for landing approaches and things like that, where you are getting down to lower airspeeds, to be aware of when that's going to happen and what you need to do to recover from it. Okay, well, that's basically it as far as our common issues with regard to learning. And if you have questions, drop them in the comments section below. And then, of course, we encourage you to subscribe to our channel. We try to have a lot of helpful bits on here that are something that everybody can benefit from, whether you're just starting in the sport or whether you're well experienced along the way. There's certainly people that are more experienced than I am. I don't claim to be the be-all and end-all, but what I can tell you is that I'm learning all the time, and everything that I learn, I am doing my best to share with you to make it a lot easier for you along the way. So we'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe to our channel and help support what we're trying to do. Thank you very much. Have a great day.